Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining and for joining us a little bit early. I'll reiterate as people continue to log on and attendees make their way in from the lobby, but everybody's been muted upon entry. So just to make sure that you can hear me, if you'd like to use the chat to enter where you're joining from, the name of your organization, that'd be great. We want to make sure we have an interactive session. So that starts with making sure that you can hear us and we can see you. Good to see some familiar faces, some repeat external guests. We're glad to have you back. All right, we'll get started in just a minute or two, but to reiterate, everybody's been muted upon entry, but we do want to hear from you. So let us know in the chat where you're joining from. Good to see people from a little bit all over. Thanks for joining. All right. I am sure that we will have people join us as we begin, but we'll get started in the interest of time. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining today's session. My name is Olivia Ross. I'm a community engagement partner here at Citizens. Thrilled to have everyone here today to hear from our friend Cecilia at Wolf and Company on an important and timely topic, using smart financial strategies to bolster the resiliency of your organization. So some quick housekeeping that I'll just reiterate. We are recording and transcribing the session to make the replay available for reference for anybody who was unable to join today. The recording will be circulated along with a post-event survey after this call. So certainly keep an eye out for that. Again, everyone muted upon entry, you are still invited to share your video if you wish, and we are encouraging you to use the chat to ask questions throughout, engage with our speaker, and let us know where you're joining from. As always, we do hope that these sessions are timely and relevant. We recognize that we're living in uncertain times, but at Citizens, we are committed to providing all of you with access to information and experts and tools that help your nonprofit continue to deliver on its mission. So today we're here to talk about how smart financial choices can help build long-term resilience. So we'll hear from Cecilia Farrat at Wolf and Company about a variety of topics related around scenario planning. And of course, we will leave some time for Q&A regarding today's discussion. And before we dive in, I just like to start by sharing Citizens' community mission. So between customers and colleagues, Citizens has a presence in all 50 states. We understand that each of these places face their own unique challenges and thus require unique and innovative solutions. That's why we're committed to leveraging all of our resources to equip organizations with the tools that they need to help the communities where we live and work thrive. And similarly, that's why we've developed Citizens Help You, this virtual conversation series that convenes a network of nonprofit partners from across the country to connect with one another and with valuable tools and resources. We aim to host a minimum of one session a month, always virtually. We invite all of our nonprofit partners and encourage you to extend the invitation to anyone who may find the content applicable, but really with the goal of providing expert insights and tangible takeaways to help our partners navigate challenges effectively and make the most of our partnership. We're constantly adding new topics. So if you have thoughts or needs, we are always encouraging people to let us know what's on their mind. There's actually a field in the post-event survey that you'll receive that will ask you if there's a topic in mind that would be good for a future session. And actually at the end of today's session, we're going to launch a poll with a few sample topics to hear what might be the most timely for a future session. So stay tuned for that. But back to today's session, though, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Cecilia, who will take over and deliver today's session.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Well, happy to be here this morning with everyone and appreciate everyone's time. I'm gonna share my screen real quick here. And then launch the presentation. Hopefully, can everyone see that okay?
Looks great.
All right, thank you. Building resiliency within your financials. So that's really the topic of today is how do we do that? Real quick, I'll just give you a background on myself and then we'll jump in. I'm a principal at Wolf & Company, and Wolf's headquartered here in Boston where I sit. I've really been working with nonprofits and growth companies for over 20 years. Most of my career working in a variety of roles with Wolf is a CPA firm, so I have in the past role I was an audit partner, and I work with nonprofits as an audit partner. Financial statement audits, annual reviews, those types of things. And then, more recently, in the past 5 years, I transitioned to leading our outsourced accounting practice, where I am a virtual CFO, fractional CFO for our clients. So working with a handful of nonprofits on their financials and financial strategy. And in addition to that experience, I also sit on a couple of boards and have a couple of past roles on boards as well. So in terms of current experience, I'm a finance chair and board member at Mass Insight Education and Research, which is focused on secondary education throughout the U.S., but predominantly, I'd say, in Massachusetts, since a lot of our work is done here locally. And then also a board member at Naturally New England, which focuses on consumer products, helping new companies launch consumer products. In the past, I've sat on the Coolidge Corner Theater Foundation Board, which is a nonprofit movie theater in Brookline, Massachusetts, kind of a cornerstone to the neighborhood there. And then the Capital Network, which was a nonprofit working to educate entrepreneurs about taking money, right, and taking either through a banking relationship, establishing a banking relationship, or through venture capital. So a variety of experiences and sizes in terms of organizations that I've worked to support. So kind of relying upon all that experience to bring, the agenda here today to you all, which is really, I'll touch base briefly on Wolf & Company and who we are, since Wolf allowed me to be here today with you. And then we'll dive into scenario planning and how to use scenario planning to help build that playbook for uncertainty. Then we'll talk about how to prepare for potential funding cuts, how to respond if you end up having funding cut without warning. And then we'll talk about building long-term resilience and what that looks like. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. One of the things I love about the nonprofit community is it is a community, so we did try to build in time for discussion. And then, of course, if you have questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the chat. so we can address them, and then we have time at the end. So essentially, when Citizens and I were talking about how to build out this presentation, what we really wanted to come up with was about 30 to 40 minutes of content to provide some structure in uncertain times, but then to leave time to talk and connect at the end. So hopefully, I hope this is of help for you today. Quickly, Wolf and Company, CPA firm. We've been around over 100 years, have a long, well-established history. We are an independently owned and operated firm, so with the structure to maintain that independence. See a lot of mergers and acquisitions these days with CPA firms, but we have a plan to remain and be an independent firm. We have, I think, over 450 folks now. We're headquartered out of Boston, so we have a lot of people in the Northeast, but we do consider ourselves a national firm. We have people and clients all over the country, and then all over the globe. To the extent that you or an organization you're involved with has an overseas or foreign office, we're a member of Alineo Global, and so we reach out to CPA firms across the globe if there's a local issue or help needed on the ground somewhere. Worked with CPA firms, all over Asia, Africa, South America, Central America. So it's been a great relationship for us, and we're able to grow with our clients and help them wherever they are. And then a little bit about my group. So Outsourced Accounting. We provide everything from what I do, virtual CFO services, to virtual controller, down to core accounting and your bookkeeping, bill pay, AR services. So really pride ourselves in offering a full suite of services, but then being able to kind of plug in where our clients need us. So that could be just a consulting engagement to help with audit readiness, moving through a first-time audit, or addressing an audit finding, to monthly closes, to helping you implement forecasting and scenario modeling. So a lot of different services, but really pride ourselves in customizing to what our clients need. And I say, as a firm, we work with over 100 nonprofit organizations. All right, so I'll kind of dive into things here. So in terms of setting the stage for the conversation today, I did want to start with some planning quotes, and I think there are a lot of fun ones out there when I think about different ways to approach planning and the importance of planning. When I was growing up, both my parents were in business, and so my dad had a lot of colorful quotes about the importance of planning. And I realized none of them are really work appropriate to share with everyone today. So I did find two quotes that I thought are really relevant to scenario modeling themselves, and just the importance of all the time and investment that we can do in planning. So I wanted to share them to kind of set the stage for the conversation today. So Abraham Lincoln, the quote, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Right. So I think the point he's making here is that all the preparation is what makes execution effective, right? And it's time well spent, right? Another quote from this one's from Eisenhower: "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." Right. So the real value isn't necessarily in the written plan, it's in the process that we go through, where we're discussing what our priorities are. We're really honing in on the mission, and really talking to each other and collaborating, right? And we're never going to be able to predict the future, but if we talk through a bunch of scenarios together and develop a plan together, then we will be ready for whatever comes. So I thought those were a good way to kind of set the stage for the conversation today. So then, how do we build a playbook? How do we think about the uncertainties? And the first thing that comes to mind as a finance professional is scenario modeling, right? So building out different financial scenarios and outcomes, and what could the future look like. So what I've done here is I've shared a graph of what the process looks like when you move through scenario modeling. I think this framework is good because it introduces what it looks like to have a continuous strategic approach to planning, where what we're doing and what the strategy here is to move away from living in uncertainty, right? To be able to be proactive and prepare for what's coming, to talk about what could happen, right? And then putting a plan in place. So it's putting control back in our hands, right, of our future, which helps relieve a lot of stress. And, I think moving through this process can take stress and emotion, right, out of uncertainty. So, I think an important, kind of takeaway is just the importance of the process, right? And so just in terms of kind of walking through what the model looks like, start at the top left here, where we're assessing and monitoring our financial position, our financial health, right? So this is really, do we understand our statement of financial position or our balance sheet? Do we understand our liquidity? What our current obligations look like, our core operating plan, like our financials, our statement of activities, where our core funders, our core revenue streams, our major expenses, right, and the timing of all of those. So really having a thorough understanding of your financial condition and position. And then you move to and your core operating plan, and then you move to really thinking and identifying risks and opportunities to the organization, to that core financial plan. And then from there, working through those risks to develop different scenarios of how they may play out, right? And then attaching a financial model to those scenarios, and then using that data from the financial model to then help you decide and prioritize how to take action. And then you move back through, and again, once you've taken the action, then you're in a monitoring, right, and seeing if things turned out the way we want, and you just continue to monitor and assess, right? So I think some key takeaways here is this is it's a continuous process. We are working to integrate different risks and opportunities into our planning. We're going to have data-driven decisions by performing the financial model. We're going to be able to connect our strategy to our resources, and we're going to be able to kind of guide our prioritization of course of action. Right? So a question I get periodically on this is how do I roll this out, right? And who needs to be involved? So I'd say, a lot of answers today are going to be like, it depends upon the size of your organization and your structure. But I'd say typically it's going to be your finance team and your executive team, like taking the lead in scenario modeling. And then, if you have a finance committee, meeting with the finance committee to discuss this with them, and then ultimately, taking the conversation to the full board. As I think, the power in this as well are all the conversations you're going to have, both, internally in the exec team, but then also, taking it, sharing it with the committee and the board. So it's a very powerful tool for collaboration and insight and alignment. The other question I get is like, how do you kind of build it into the existing process, right? So many of us, maybe July 1, we started our year. Our budgeting process may have been in the spring, right? So, typically I would say you could align this with a budgeting process, or if you're now doing budget to actuals, maybe you can align it to that, bring it into that process. We may have a different strategic planning process where we could bring this in and help to inform our strategic planning, if that's a task force or a separate kind of process that we have. Or, if you have a finance committee that's meeting every other month or monthly, like working this into, the agenda that you're working through with your finance committee, could be a way to, get started. So I'll pause there. I think, in terms of where we're going from here, I'm going to, assume that folks are fairly strong in assessing and monitoring their current financial state. And we're going to spend time talking about, the right-hand side of the circle. So identifying risks and opportunities, developing scenarios, and modeling financial impact to make decisions. So that's kind of where we're going to spend some time going forward. Okay, so, mapping our risk landscape. So doing our risk assessment on risks and opportunities. I think kind of sharing this visual of a risk matrix and talking through, what a risk assessment looks like really helps to provide, again, structure and process, right? How do we, work our way through the different risks that our organizations face? So I think this is a really nice way to kind of visualize that. And I'll just kind of go through it kind of quickly here in terms of the risk matrix. So on what we've done is we've created a matrix or a quadrant where we're rating things and plotting out risks. We're doing a brainstorming and then plotting out risks in terms of, is the risk of occurrence, the probability, is it high or low? So we're moving as we move right, we're moving towards higher probability, and then low impact on the bottom. Then we're moving to higher and higher impact on the top, right? Impact to the organization. And with this impact, I do mean I'm coming with a finance lens. So I tend to think, I know we use impact in a variety of ways in nonprofits, but in this scenario, I'm thinking about financially, right? And I'll just say too, I plotted out some example risks here. They are purely just examples, right? Each organization is going to have its own risks that it's facing, and its own rating of those risks, right? So what I did here is I plotted out a couple that came to mind thinking about the organizations that I work with, and I also did include, ones that are directly financial, and then some more operational ones that may end up having a financial impact that we would need to plan for. And then, they could be plotted out. You could have similar risk, but they could be plotted out very differently in terms of probability or financial impact to your organization. So I wanted to make sure you didn't kind of think that I was prescribing anything here in terms of risks. But in terms of how you move your way through the assessment, when you plot out risks that are both high impact and high probability, we put that in the top right quadrant. Those risks are really going to be risks that threaten the organization, right? Those are big impact, high probability. These are things that could threaten our program, our mission, the organization itself. So we really want to make sure that hopefully there's not many, right, of those. And we want to make sure that we've addressed those with some detailed planning and a contingency plan, right? Then if I move over to the left. So you have risks that are high impact but lower probability. So these are going to be things that are rare but still significant, right? So in this example, I thought, for example, the loss of our largest funder, right? Maybe we know that funder is really happy. They have the means to give. They're really excited about the mission. They're really excited about all the impact we've been able to create. So the probability is really low. But if they're a really significant funder, they probably should still be on there because the impact is high, right? It is a risk, and what would we do, right, if something happened and they could not continue funding us at the level that they currently are, right? So rare but significant, still likely warrants a plan. And then we come down to the low impact, high probability quadrant. These are kind of like more your day-to-day risks, right? The risks of running an organization or running a business. So you may or may not have a contingency plan in place for them. You may already have kind of operationally addressed the risk. So it may be more of a monitoring that you're doing on some of these. And then the final quadrant is, what we might classify as, low impact, low probability. So the example here might be like a key vendor is unavailable for a month or two, or something happens, right? So we think it's a low probability that would happen, and maybe we have already identified an alternative in case they can't work with us for that month, right? Or whatever the case may be. So think of those as more minor risks. So I think going through this process, allows you to have a structure to really think about the different risks that your organization faces, and which ones you agree upon, which ones you need to spend time on, and how to start to address them, right, and mitigate those risks. And then you can do the same thing with opportunities. Obviously, today the focus is a little bit more on uncertainty and managing uncertainty. But on the flip side of this, you can also plot out your opportunities, right, that the organization has to make impact, to achieve new financial metrics. Okay, so we've done our risk assessment, and now depending upon what those risks look like, kind of, will inform how you want to move forward with developing a scenario, and assessing financial impact, right? So a couple different options here. If you have a lot of risks or several risks that are yes or no answers, right, you may just need a contingency plan. Like if you have one or two, larger risks that are yes or no, maybe you just need a contingency plan that specifically addresses, right, the result or outcome of that yes, no, right? What do we do if we get the grant? What do we do if we don't get the grant? You may not need to have a full kind of like it's laid out here as an example, best to worst case scenario. Maybe you just need to think of the contingency plan of, if you don't get the grant, we'll look at funding the program through other, profitability elsewhere within the organization. We'll look at new funders. We'll look at maybe we can use some of our investments. Maybe we can run the program, but run it smaller, leaner, right? Those types of things. It's more of a contingency plan. When you have more of a range of outcomes, a little bit less, less so yes or no, and more a range of outcomes where, what I've shown kind of here, where you have best to worst case. One that comes to mind is membership, right? If you're a membership-based organization, maybe you have a likely scenario in this one. We have 1,000 members, 500,000 of revenue. But what if there's a risk of, if we enter a recession, or some of those memberships, could they decline, right, year over year? What would that look like, right? So you have a range of, okay, we could see some decline if we enter a recession. On the flip side, if we are able to roll out a new type of membership or get into a new geography, like we could be, right, adding members. So we want to have a range of potential outcomes. So that's when you get into modeling, your best, likely, and worst case scenarios. And this is a high level example of what that could look like. And this might be like a board level summary of what that could look like when you're working in your team together, for example, on membership, you might break out the different types, right? You might have your kind of core membership, then you could have affiliates, students, retired members, right? And you could have maybe the worst case scenario is all in affiliates or students, right? Like maybe the risk is pinpointed, right? And that will help drive the action item or what the next step is to kind of avoid the worst case scenario, right? So you'd be drilling in a level deeper on some of the different revenue streams. So you can do you can have the range of best, likely, worst case. Another way I've seen this split is to do what has been secured and what's unsecured. Right. So depending upon the nature of the organization, we might have the members are signed up. So here's our secured kind of memberships, and here's what we're still looking to, who we're looking to get signed up throughout the year. And this is kind of unsecured revenue. Similar with contributions, right? You could have, here's our recurring donors, right? And then here's who we're looking to add this year. And the risk is really maybe more towards the ones that we're looking to add this year than the recurring donations or the pledges that we've already received. So I think that can also be a helpful way, right, to look at different scenarios of how the year could play out. And then I think, once you've kind of done this on the revenue side, then it's easier to be able to analyze the expense side of the organization and say, if we, our core budget is probably our likely case, but if we have best case, here's how we're going to, here's what we would need to spend, right, to be able to fulfill, right, the additional grants or whatever the additional program, whatever the case may be. And on the worst case side, here's our levers, right, that we can pull to save on expenses, to limit, right, if we're projecting a deficit on the worst case, what can we do to eliminate that deficit or address it, right, on the expense side of things as well. What I wanted to cover on kind of the modeling out best, likely, and worst case scenarios. The next slide, I guess an interesting one. If you end up with a mix of risks where you have some yes, nos, and some ranges, right? I think how to kind of, I think of all those the different things that could pan out. One option is to essentially convert your yes or no answer. I'm sorry, convert your range of answer into a yes or no, right? So an example of this would be, let's take the membership example. So if I'm worried about a membership decline, I think my worst case is a 20% membership decline. Um, let's plot out, the possible outcome, and then to help define like a threshold for implementing an action, or implementing a contingency plan, or implementing maybe some of those expense cuts, or looking at other revenue streams. So what's our threshold for action? So in the membership example, in this hypothetical example, like maybe we're worried about a 20% decline. Maybe the action threshold is, what if once we hit 5%, or maybe if we hit 5% in the first quarter, right, of a decline, then what is the action step that we're going to take to help mitigate any further decline? Or maybe, uh, you know, maybe the action, or so, excuse me, maybe the response is staggered or tiered, right, depending upon the significance of the dollars. So I think this is a nice way to, kind of move through some of those risks, and define the action item associated with it. Again, it's a way to think about the process, and to think about and agree upon when we take action. So again, kind of moving out of that uncertainty, putting control back within your hands, within the organization's hands, of we have a plan, we have a process if we see these things happen, and we know exactly when we're going to move on that. And this kind of also sums up, kind of gets us to kind of the other side of the scenario cycle, where we talked about, assessing financial health. We talked about the risk assessment and how to think about risk. Then these are the scenarios, right, that we've come up with, and their potential financial impact. And then this ties in action, right, and helps to prioritize action and when you take steps as the year progresses. So that kind of moves us through, and then you get back to, after you take an action, again, assessing and monitoring your position. So that kind of moves us through the cycle. So the next, part of the presentation, I kind of wanted to pivot to talking about preparing for potential cuts, and then responding to cuts. Okay, so preparing for potential cuts. So kind of identified 4 key areas. Obviously, with a finance focus on, not just responding to the cut, preparing for the financial challenge, and preparing in a way that, we can keep the organization's long-term health intact, right? So how do we move through these conversations? So the first thing that comes to mind immediately is, the CFO, is liquidity, and the financial condition of the organization. So we want to look at and think about our cash reserves and our overall kind of liquidity runway. If what would be the impact of this funding cut that we're talking about? Where am I sitting currently on cash reserves and liquidity, and then what would the impact of the cut be, right, on my cash reserves and liquidity? Also going to be looking at banking relationships, right? If we have access to credit, if we have a line of credit. Many of the organizations I work with, I always encourage, even if we are not going to use it, if we can get a line of credit, it's nice to have it in place, just to have it there in case we ever need it. I think it's relatively inexpensive for the kind of the peace of mind and the access to that if we need it. So that would be, another step, is looking at those banking relationships, and then looking at, our major funders and our large customers. So what can we do to kind of reach out, put our arms around our funders and our large customers? Will it change our reliance upon them if funds are cut? Is there anything that we can do where we might be able to ask them to, fund something a little bit early, right? Or, provide us with, if it's a program that we're running, could we get payment early? Could we talk about advanced payment terms? If we are really concerned about managing our liquidity, if we have really good relationships there, that's often not necessarily a hard conversation to have if people understand and you've got, relationships there. So that's one place to look for additional liquidity if we're not seeing it necessarily in a banking relationship. And then program economics is another big one, really understanding the economics of the different programs and events that you run, understanding which programs and events make money and which do not, which require funding. Or heavy fundraising, and how will the cut impact these different programs, and will that change if the program, how it's funded. A comment here on a lot of the organizations that I work with may not initially have a firm understanding of program economics. I think it depends how your accounting system is set up and what you're tracking. So this may require a little bit of work to kind of peel back the onion and really understand what's profitable, what's taking additional funding, but a really, really worthwhile use of time here to kind of dive in. And it really, I've found it creates great conversations and awareness. And sometimes there's, we didn't realize that this program was losing money. And if maybe we haven't realized it, but we also haven't increased the cost of attendance in a number of years because we want to make sure we have full attendance. But what does it look like if we just increase the cost of attendance? Could we break even? Could we have a little bit of cushion? So it really it's going to create really good conversations, both with exec team and then finance committee. Third bucket, risk management. So building reserves. So if we don't have cash reserves already kind of built or a policy already in place, looking at implementing a policy is an important step if we're looking at potential cuts. Monitoring short-term liquidity. So I see this more at my for-profit clients where we do 13, a lot of them just can already have, or we do 13-week cash flow forecasts, where we're looking at cash flow on a weekly basis. I see this a lot less in place at nonprofits, but if we are worried about liquidity and we're looking at a cut, I think looking at cash flow, starting to look at it and map it out on a weekly basis for 2 to 3 months out is also a really worthwhile exercise. I would say diversifying funding streams, right? What can we do? Who can we reach out to now? What does new funding look like? New grants? As I said, in kind of step one, kind of putting our arms around our funders and seeing if we might be able to accelerate some of the giving, and then also just in terms of talking with your board, talking openly and honestly with your board about the risk of potential cuts and the impact, seeing what partnerships are out there, who within the board's network may be able to assist the organization, and really just, having a frank conversation with the board of what things would look like. And then lastly, kind of going back to, developing a plan and having a process, right? Triggers for action. So when do we want to take action? Are we going to wait until the cut is official? Or are there things that we can do now? One thing we can do now is definitely, if you don't already have a contingency plan, work to establish one. And what can we look at in terms of things that we maybe can do or need to do in the short term versus long term? Maybe some of these are short-term solutions, and we have a different long-term solution. So again, putting the plan in place and then agreeing upon, when do we need to take action? And then the next topic was just kind of going through responding to different funding cuts. So again, with my finance hat on, there's kind of 3 priorities that come to mind. If my funding has been cut, the first thing I'm going to do is update my financial projection and my cash flow forecast for the impact of that. If we have a contingency plan, look at putting that in place. Immediately doing expense triage, right? And review of what my obligations are. What obligations can I push out? What obligations can I maybe suspend, right? What things can I suspend to save money on in the immediate term, and the impact of that. Again, reviewing, lines of credit, other funding mechanisms we talked about on the previous slide. Can we pull money forward anywhere? Can we, in a short-term instance, rely upon our line of credit if we have a liquidity crunch coming as a result of the cut? And really understanding the financial impact of it and being able to speak to, the date that we'll need additional funding, right, for that, for the program, or hopefully not the organization, but for the program, like how long can we operate after the funding cut? And knowing those details and the financial forecast kind of inside and out is really helpful. It's another way also to kind of take some of the emotion and stress out of it, just to know, right, exactly what those points are. And obviously protecting the mission, right? We want to, after we kind of stabilize the finances, we do want to agree upon what is essential versus what's discretionary. Sometimes those are, challenging conversations, but really agree upon what is essential, and looking again at that program profitability and understanding what makes money for the organization, what is sustainable, and what may not be sustainable at the moment or needs additional funding. And again, like revisiting the costs and planned spending, what can we defer that will not hinder, the mission and what we're trying to accomplish. And then lastly, I think, good communication with the board and the team. I'm a big believer in transparency. And that's why I like to know my numbers in terms of when exactly, right, we'll need additional funding and what exactly the consequences will be, to be able to build transparency and trust within the board and the team, right? So I think that that last piece is important. And another way to kind of think about these, so finances, mission, and rally and engage the board and the team. Another way to think about it is financial discipline, right? With strategic clarity, right? What are we trying to achieve? And then also the culture and communication that the organization has is, when we think about, the best way to respond. So then kind of the conclusion here about building long-term resilience. I hope everything that we've talked about, helps you think about how to build long-term resilience within your organization. I like this pyramid image because I think it captures, how we build long-term resilience, building kind of layer by layer, starting with a strong foundation. I did put, strong governance and financial stewardship at the bottom, kind of being, the foundation that we work within. I think that is essentially the culture of the organization, right? That we have, an outlook about financial stewardship and governance, and that communication and transparency around finances. So that creates our basis for resilience building. And I think communication, when we think about it, right, like all of our relationships are built upon communication and trust. So that's the foundation. Then from there, we're able to build on that robust financial planning and scenario modeling, right? Thinking through the different risks and opportunities that the organization has ahead of it. And then thinking about program profitability, really understanding, again, a level deeper into our finances. So what makes money for the organization, what takes additional resources in terms of funding, right? So that's a big one. And then strong liquidity and reserve planning. The thing that comes to mind there in terms of liquidity is it's our breathing room, right? It's our cushion to be able to have time to kind of bounce back and give the organization time to respond. So another really critical piece there. And then, diversifying revenue streams. So one that, comes to mind frequently in these conversations is always looking for new revenue streams. But, that does come, with the base of everything else that's kind of built underneath it. So some takeaways is that, resilience, it's, obviously built over time. We're creating a base for long-term stability. We're thinking about our risks and opportunities. We're building in that flexibility through liquidity. And we're hoping to reduce reliance on any single source of revenue and really strengthen sustainability of the organization.
Celia, looks like we've got a question in the chat that I'll read out here from Matt, who first thanks you for this presentation, but a question, nobody likes to hear about a bad funding year or cuts in services, but of course it does happen. So what's a good way to communicate about a downturn without raising red flags in the donors who we might be going after to ask for more in help?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I mean, I think it likely depends a little bit upon the scenario of why, right? Why there's a potential downturn. I like to think about focusing on impact and all the, or all the ways and all the things that the organization is accomplishing. Its mission, how we are, being really efficient, how we're kind of stretching the dollar. So rather than, and I wouldn't shy away necessarily from communicating a downturn, but rather than having that be the focus, kind of pivoting the focus back to all the things that we are accomplishing with the resources that we have. And if I could point to just overall economics to kind of explain, a funding downturn, then like general economy, then I would do that. But yeah, I think kind of focusing on what we are accomplishing is helpful.
That kind of answers his second part to the question around how much do we explain about the downturn reasons versus how much we talk about the plan forward, but sounds like a balanced approach is probably best. All right. Any other questions from any of our attendees today? Feel free to use the chat. And while we wait to see if anybody has any additional thoughts or questions, I'm actually going to work to launch that poll that I referenced, a question for each of you on what might be useful to hear on for a future session. But of course, we do still have time. So any questions for Cecilia on today's presentation, we welcome them. We will be sharing the materials and the recording, yes.
Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope it gave, some things to think about, processes, ways to, I always think of, working with, we've got over 50 clients right within my group, and process and structure is how we, work through things. So.
Getting some good feedback in the chat on today's content, and appreciate those who are providing opinions for a future session. One question from Robin, could you talk about how to communicate financial scenario planning to the staff?
Yeah, excellent question. I think that generally, I would typically see that coming after, right after we've got alignment at the executive level with the finance committee and board. Then, yeah, working backward kind of to the staff and what is disseminated to the staff. Because I think what's going to ultimately happen is that you're going to kind of operationalize or work to operationalize, right, some of those plans. So there will be staff people ultimately involved in that. I think it's going to vary based upon the organization, but I think it comes, once we've got board approval on what the action plan is and when we're going to implement things, then it is working on a communication plan to the staff and when it's appropriate to bring them in. And identifying who's best to do what, right, in the action plan.
Great. And then another question from Matt, again, shared some feedback, likes the multiple options for presenting the fundraising from best case, expected, worst case. Do you do this in an annual meeting where the budget is approved, or is there another landscape that might make sense for that? How does it happen more with the finance committee to know the information, but to present the one budget idea for approval?
Yeah. I think, what I've seen be most effective is, when you're working, frequently they have like working sessions where the exec team has gotten together and put together the range of the plan, right? Worst to best case. And then you're presenting and presenting it to the finance committee and walking them through and getting their feedback on it. So it is shared in fair amount of detail with the finance committee. And then the finance committee is kind of deciding, okay, what recommendations do we have and what are we going to ultimately kind of trim down and bring to the board. Oftentimes you're not necessarily going to get the full presentation to the board, but I do think you're going to have a full presentation with the finance committee, because they're going to help you decide what interim or interim steps are taken, decisions are made, and then what we want to bring to the board for vote or full decision.
Excellent. Any other questions? While we wait, I'll also just remind that the meeting materials recording post-event survey will be sent out shortly after this call, so keep an eye out for that. Tim asks, what information is typically needed to present to the financial institution when seeking a line of credit?
Yeah. So they'll likely want they're going to pull down your audited financial statements and your 990. Then they'll want the internal financial statements that go along with those audits, and then most recent financial statements. They usually go back a couple of years, so 2 to 3 years of history, monthly history. So your statement of financial position, your statement of activities, your cash flows, what those have looked like for the past. I'd say 2 to 3 years is a good starting point on a monthly basis. They're typically going to run their ratios and kind of let you know what ratios need to be maintained and what reporting they'll need going forward, but that's a good place to start. They'll typically also, I'll just keep going. They'll typically also drill into like your receivables, right? Your pledges and receivables too, wanting the details of those. But I just helped a client obtain one, and it took, it's more about pulling together like all of the information, right? And having the conversations. I think it took us less than 60 days to pull it together.
Helpful insight for sure. And on top of that, is it a good idea to start with the current banking relationship?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. If you've got an existing relationship, have the conversation with them, see what their nonprofit banking practice looks like, and when they typically lend to nonprofits. If that's, if you talk to them and find out it's not an area of like lending or expertise, maybe they can point you to another bank that does. I also, we work with clients. I typically recommend more than one banking relationship. It's nice to have a local bank and then also a larger one. Just, thinking about past couple years, what we've seen with SVB and just a little bit of, some of those challenges. So I do recommend, potentially looking at more than one.
Excellent. Any other questions? There's a lot. Hopefully you can see it now since you're not sharing your presentation, Cecilia, but lots of great feedback. People looking forward to sharing the information with their teams and seeing how they might be able to incorporate it in their day-to-day. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thanks to all of the nonprofit partners, representatives that joined last time. You will receive the replay from today's session, post-event survey, meeting materials, invitations to future sessions as well via email from us here at Citizens. Hope to see you on a future session. And again, thank you for your feedback on that poll. We want to make sure that these are timely, and based on the feedback today, we will work on scheduling that next session, and you will receive communications about that via email. Thank you again all for joining. We hope to see you on future sessions and hope that everybody has a great rest of the day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.